I call on Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm here today to discuss Scotland's progress in greenhouse gas emissions reduction. But before I go into this in detail, I want to express how pleased I am to return to Government as the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Rural Affairs. It's a portfolio that's of great importance to the people of Scotland. Absolutely. And I am acutely aware of the responsibility that we all have to limit and mitigate the impacts of climate change and to take effective action on its causes. These impacts are felt by people both at home and abroad. We've sadly grown used to witnessing devastating wildfires in places like California across southern Europe, but in recent years we're seeing similar events here in Scotland, including at Davamur in the Highlands, which last year experienced the first mega wildfire in any of the 4 nations of the UK. And be in no doubt, this devastation is caused by climate change. But, Presiding Officer, climate action is not just about reducing emissions. It's also an economic, social and health opportunity. It will make people's lives better. It is creating thousands of jobs, with many more to come. It will provide warmer homes, its huge potential to reduce the cost of living, and it will strengthen the resilience of communities, not only to protect themselves against the impacts of climate change, but also make their neighbourhoods much nicer places to live. I published the climate change plan before the dissolution of the last Parliament. As much time and effort that creating that plan took, Presiding Officer, really, comparatively, that's the easy part. Now we need to drive delivery of our ambitious policies to decarbonise our society and capitalise on all the benefits and economic opportunities before us. And I say we, because every vote, every decision that Parliament takes will see us succeed or fail. And I'm not just talking about failure to reach targets, but failure to harness the clear benefits of climate action. Many of us have, over the years in this Parliament, seen consensus on targets. But when it comes to policies and actions to deliver on those targets, even the most benign of action face political opposition. And that's just not good enough. We all need to ask ourselves if we are a blocker to progress and delivery, or we are an enabler. Presiding Officer, earlier today we published the Scottish Greenhouse Gas Statistics 2024, which provide us with detail of Scotland's latest progress on emissions reduction. The official statistics show that Scottish emissions in 2024 were 50.5% lower than in 1990, and that's a further reduction of 1%, or 0.4 megatons, compared to our position in 2023. The majority of sectors within the statistics saw a modest reduction in emissions, with the largest reduction being in industry, where there was a reduction of 0.3 megatons of CO2, and that was driven by reduced fossil fuel use. There were, however, small increases in emissions related to transport and buildings. International aviation and shipping increased by 0.2 megatons of CO2, returning to pre-COVID levels, and domestic transport and buildings each showed very slight increases. These statistics also continue to show that Scotland has the largest reduction in emissions in the UK between 1990 and 2024 at 50.5%. The overall reduction in UK emissions, including international aviation and shipping, was 49%. Emissions in England fell by 50.2%, followed by Wales at 44.4%, and in Northern Ireland by 28.5%. So today we've published 2 further important climate reports, Presiding Officer. Scotland's carbon footprint 1998 to 2022. The official statistics there measures both our domestic and imported consumption-based emissions and shows that Scotland's carbon footprint has increased by 1.6% between 2021 and 2022, with equivalent figures for the UK showing a 3% growth over this period. Our nitrogen use efficiency in Scotland annual report 26 has also been published, and it provides an update on our progress in improving nitrogen use efficiency across Scotland, supporting reductions in this significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. Presiding Officer, these figures tell us something important, that progress continues to be made in Scotland, but we must accelerate the transition. We're bound by law to take action on reducing our emissions, but it's also an economic and social imperative. The prizes are absolutely worth it. Within the last few weeks, the Confederation of British Industry and the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit published a report outlining that Scotland's net zero economy currently supports 105,000 jobs and £10.2 billion in gross value added. Tens of thousands of livelihoods in Scotland are already being supported by this transition to net zero. The climate transition is not just an abstract future. It's a driver of economic growth that's already delivering for Scotland and Scottish people today. These economic benefits underline the importance of our continued action to reach net zero and that reflect that ambitious action the Scottish Government has already taken forward. We've taken action on warmer homes by providing funding for the installation of more than 2,500 heat pumps just last year through the Home Energy Scotland Grant and Loan Scheme. In transport, as a direct result of Scottish Government funding and enabling private sector investment, Scotland has one of the most comprehensive public charging networks in the whole of the UK, with over 12,700 public electric vehicle chargers. We're also supporting new industrial opportunities through carbon capture and storage in Scotland, including providing £3 million of grant funding towards the Acorn project, working collaboratively with industry and the UK Government. However, we need to see the deployment of the £200 million that was pledged by the UK Government to get that off the ground. And we continue to back our farmers and crofters to reduce emissions and improve their bottom line through sustainable farming practices. Our rural areas are already playing a vital role in Scotland's climate transition, with over 10,000 hectares of peatland restored in 2023-24 and 53,000 hectares of woodland planted in the last 5 years. This is action which supports rural jobs, restores our natural environment, enables nature-based solutions to the climate crisis to cut emissions, and also, critically, enhances climate resilience and community resilience. The Climate Change Plan, our Environment Strategy and our Circular Economy Strategy form a coordinated plan for effectively taking on the climate and nature crisis. And going forward, my colleague, Stephen Gethins, will lead on a heat and buildings delivery plan, which will set out the actions necessary to meet our ambitious decarbonisation target in that area. It will provide further clarity on how our buildings are heated and help stimulate the clean heat market, encouraging the clean heat supply chain. This action is not just a crucial step towards decarbonising our buildings, it's about warmer homes, it's about improving the lives of Scottish families and, critically, decreasing the scourge of fuel poverty in this country. By the end of the year, we'll also publish a route map for deploying negative emissions technologies in Scotland, which will provide a framework for how carbon removals can be developed and deployed to support Scotland's statutory commitment to reach net zero by 2045. That's another market creation opportunity, but it's a huge innovation opportunity as well. Technology that can be built and designed here, which we can also take to the rest of the world. Presiding Officer, the Climate Change Plan, which we published in March, set out £42.3 billion in direct financial benefits for Scotland. £42.3 billion. This included savings to households through policies like discretionary bus travel, which the Child Poverty Action Group estimates can save more than £3,000 in the lifetime of a child for families in Scotland, compared to living elsewhere in the UK. On top of this, the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute estimated that Scotland's climate change plan would provide £8 billion in wider socio-economic impacts through things like improved health from physical activity, better air quality and warmer homes. So whether it's providing thousands of jobs, improving the air our children breathe, making it more affordable to travel, climate action is already improving daily life across Scotland. And those who argue that we should give up on net zero are in effect arguing that we should give up on warmer homes for families, give up over 100,000 jobs in the net zero economy, and billions in financial benefits for the people and businesses across Scotland. This government, will not turn its back on these opportunities, and I hope that this chamber will join me in that. Presiding Officer, today's statistics show continued progress towards our net zero goals, but we need to go faster and further. From island communities investing in renewables, to rural areas restoring peatland, to cities improving air quality, to massive job creation across the whole of Scotland, the benefits are being felt in every part of Scotland. Achieving net zero is an investment in our economy, in our homes and in all our futures. And that's why I'm focused on delivering fair climate action which supports the priorities of this government. Thank you.
The Cabinet Secretary has completed her statement, so I will now take questions on the issues raised. I intend to allow 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press their request to speak buttons now. I call on Claire Baker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of the statement. I last led on environment and rural affairs for Scottish Labour in 2014, and I'm afraid to say, returning to the annual statement today on meeting our 2045 targets, the analysis and questions to the Government do largely remain the same. The Parliament agreed the 2045 targets, not because of ideology, but because of science. There is clear evidence that for the future of our country and others around the world, we must address the impact of climate change and reduce our carbon footprint. And yet our progress so far has not been the result of intentional policy, but too often has been a consequence of what is happening anyway. At a time that progress should be going faster, progress is stalling, and the carbon footprint figure published today has actually increased. Friends of the Earth are saying that these are a meagre reduction. Stop Climate Chaos today have said the figures are a stark confirmation that action to tackle climate change has been nowhere near strong or fast enough. The Climate Change Committee called for immediate accelerated implementation. There is political will in this Parliament to make it happen, but action so far on 2,500 heat pumps last year and 12,700 electric car chargers are not going to deliver the change we really need to see. So at the start of this session, and with the 2030 targets now in our sight, how is the Scottish Government and the Minister, the Cabinet Secretary, going to accelerate the action and make sure we can meet our 2045 targets?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I say to Claire Baker, first of all, a welcome to her role, and I look forward to working with her. And I very much take to heart what she said about the will to make progress on this. The answer to her substantive question about how we're going to do it has been laid out in the Climate Change Plan. So the Climate Change Plan is effectively the roadmap for all the policies that we're going to take forward. Now, I'm convening early meetings with my Cabinet colleagues because, of course, the action to deliver on particularly the transport policies, the energy policies, the housing policies and all the social policies associated with this will actually lie with other Cabinet Secretaries, and we were, before my group, cross-government to make sure that we are hitting the ground running, and I'm going to be convening a meeting in the next couple of days with those relevant Cabinet Secretaries and their officials. But I also have reached out to every one of my shadow Cabinet Secretaries as well, because I think that the fundamental point that Claire Baker makes is correct. We have, I would say, since I've been in this Parliament in the last 10 years, I would say we have made progress. We are over halfway to net zero. I don't agree with the position that these are things that would have happened anyway. You look at the tremendous amount of peatland restoration, which is sequestering carbon and stopping leakage into the atmosphere. There is also a great deal of work that's been done in terms of the government support associated with EV chargers and the heat pumps and various other things that have been done for businesses to reduce their carbon footprint. But I want to work with each and every individual shadow of mine to be talking about our shared goals, our shared ideas, and I don't believe anyone's got a monopoly on good ideas. The Climate Change Plan was set out in March. However, are there areas on which we can do more? I want to talk to my counterparts across the chamber to work out how we can do that, because it is Parliament's challenge. It is not just a government's challenge. It's society's challenge, but it's also Parliament's challenge. And particularly where we have individuals in here who do not believe in climate action, and we've heard them so far in the last 3 weeks, it's ever more important that those who very much understand the science and very much realise the imperative around climate action, that we stick together and we get action done.
And I would ask both questioners and the answers to be shorter. Duncan Massey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for an interesting statement. I'll just make a couple of notes to start with. I note that at the emission levels in the report, the 2024 levels, that these emissions represent around 0.07% of global emissions, so a total rounding error. I would also point out that the last 5 years, Scotland's emissions have not declined barely at all. But this share of global emissions will keep declining as emissions around the world keep increasing, notably with the large economies of China and India. But where my question would come from is I massively disagree that this is an economic opportunity. Rather, it's a massive economic cost for Scotland. It's driving expensive energy, it's driving deindustrialisation, and we've seen this with the closure of Grangemouth refinery and with Musmoran. And actually we can see it in the figures of the report that the largest reduction, nearly 80% of it, came from reduced fuel use for combustion. That is basically industry closing down. So I would ask the Cabinet Secretary, has she reviewed how much of this reduction is actually just caused by deindustrialisation, how many jobs have been lost, and can she elaborate on that? Thank you.
And again, I would ask that questions are shorter.
I will try and keep this short. But for Duncan Massey, with respect, to stand up as a representative of the North East of Scotland and say that there is no economic benefit to his constituents, to my constituents, the North East of Scotland, is frankly astounding. 12.7% of local employment in Aberdeen is supported by net zero activity. In Aberdeen City alone, net zero activity contributes £1.1 billion of GVA. There has been £6.8 billion worth of pipeline of energy projects in Aberdeenshire alone. Those are facts. These are not just, I haven't just plucked these out of the air. And to also say on the one hand, oh, Scotland isn't emitting that much in terms of compared to globally, but why aren't we doing better? It's completely and utterly all over the place. And also to say that the climate action is accelerating any kind of job losses in other areas is completely back to front as well. What we're doing is making sure that we have the replacement jobs and activity for when we do see an increased and accelerated decline of the industries that rely on fossil fuel and burning of fossil fuels. That will make Scotland more resilient. And frankly, I would much rather be in the situation of protecting jobs in the North East and creating jobs in the North East of Scotland, where Mr Massey represents, rather than turning my back on those opportunities.
Absolutely. There are a number of members who have indicated they wish to ask a question, so again I would ask if questions and indeed answers could be more brief. I call on Alan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Peterhead Power Station is the biggest carbon emitter in Scotland, but it's also, with dispatchable energy production, vital for energy security. Carbon capture is an obvious solution. The Cabinet Secretary touched on that. But what can be done to make the UK Government actually stump up the £200 million development they promised, but more importantly, funding akin to the £22 billion allocated for carbon capture south of the border?
Cabinet Secretary.
Apologies, Presiding Officer. Alan Brown alights on something that when I was formerly responsibility for energy in particular, was almost becoming a sort of twice monthly conversation with our UK Government counterparts. £200 million of development was pledged by the current UK government for Acorn. That money is still not flowing. But Alan Brown makes a really good point. This is the most, I suppose, I don't like the phrase shovel-ready, but it is the most mature of the CCUS projects in the whole of the UK. Yet other less mature projects have been given billions of pounds. The Acorn project, however, is vital to decarbonising Scotland's emitters, delivering a just transition. It could unlock billions in private investment while driving that essential progress to net zero. So I agree with Alan Brown that we need to get clarity on where the £200 million is and make sure that we get this project off the ground, because it will also create many new jobs in the place that I'm from in particular.
Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. Can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her role and say that, on these benches we're looking forward to working with her. But can I also say to her, though, that today is not a day for celebration, because overall our carbon footprint in Scotland is actually going up. It's not going down, and it should be going down faster and faster. We have continually pointed out in the Greens the huge reliance in the climate plan on technologies like Acorn, like CCS, which do not yet exist. And I hear what Alan Brown suggests to you, Cabinet Secretary, but we could spend £200 million on carbon capture and storage and still not have a viable technology that actually delivers the carbon reduction. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, when will she come up with a plan B if CCS doesn't happen, which sees steeper reductions in transport, home heating and agriculture, but can also benefit jobs, benefit the economy and benefit the people of Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not going to turn my back on one of the major innovative opportunities that Scotland has, particularly in CCUS. In CCUS, we have got probably arguably the largest capacity in terms of under the seabed in the North Sea. We also have a mature project that, frankly, should have been delivered 10, 12 years ago, which has continuously had the rug pulled from under it. Now, first of all, I want to say to Mark Ruskell, thank you for his warm wishes. I absolutely want to continue working with him, and I hope that at the end of today's ballot he is successful in becoming the convener of a committee that will be scrutinising me, if I've got that correct. Yeah. But I also want to say is that the climate change plan is an evolving document. We will not rule anything out. We will not make sure that it's not a static document that sits on a shelf that is unchanged. We will have to go with the situations as we find things in terms of new innovations, but also making sure that when we do see disappointing results, 1% reduction for 2024 is not what it should be. We should be accelerating faster. But the climate change plan is an evolving document, and I extend the same words to Mark Ruskell that I did to Claire Baker. I want to work with him and his colleagues on how we can make sure that the climate change plan is delivered, but also the climate change plan is enhanced as we go forward so that we do get to net zero by 2045.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement, and I welcome her to her post, and I look forward to once again working with her on the extensive portfolio that she holds. Presiding Officer, the agriculture budget has faced year-on-year cuts under this SNP government. Yet in the Cabinet Secretary's statement there is a clear expectation that agriculture will continue to reduce emissions and that land use will come under increasing scrutiny, while notably there is no clarity on the future direction of livestock policy. The Scottish Government's Rural Support Plan, published at the end of the last Parliament with minimal opportunity for scrutiny, indicated a shift in funding away from active farming towards environmental schemes over the course of this Parliament. And at the same time, we are seeing worrying signals elsewhere. In England, Ed Miliband last week expressed support for policies to reduce herd numbers without a matching reduction in meat and dairy consumption. This will simply lead to cheap imports at a higher carbon footprint. Therefore, given the importance of the beef and sheep sectors to rural Scotland, will the Cabinet Secretary now give a clear and unequivocal commitment that the Government will bring forward policies that actively protect and sustain our national herd and flock, rather than continue with a position where there are no safeguards in place and a real risk of further decline towards a critical mass cliff edge? And will she set out detailed proposals so that farmers finally have that certainty that they need?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Finlay Carson for his warm wishes. I look forward to working with him as well. It's not true to say that there has been reductions. The Scottish Government will invest over £1 billion in 2026-27 in rural affairs budget. We continue to provide that certainty to the industry. But critically, the substance of the question, the speech before the question, if you permit me, was that about herd numbers. Now, if he cast his mind back, I know the election took a long time and we're all away from here for a number of weeks, but if he remembers, I did not take the advice from the Committee for Climate Change on active policies around reducing herd numbers in Scotland, because I recognise that it will offshore emissions. I recognise that it will have a detrimental impact on our agriculture. So I have, with my officials and with my Cabinet colleagues, formulated a climate change plan which does not depend on anything such as he has described as happening elsewhere in the UK. And I will continue to do that. And of course, Mr Fairley will be working with me in that regard, with regard to how we sustain active farming. We will give direct payments for active farming. We will be making sure that we support them in decarbonisation of their activities and indeed in improving the bottom line as a result of those activities. And I look forward to him scrutinising me on that.
Sana Dykstra-Downey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of the statement and welcome her to her role. And I very much share her ambition to make climate change something which needs sensible, practical solutions, not ideological blockages. But this is a government which has repeatedly failed to meet the majority of its climate change targets in the last parliamentary session. The Cabinet Secretary talks about making homes warmer, but in my constituency of Edinburgh Northern, many people are living in old tenements where it's way more difficult to get consensus to insulate homes and upgrade heating. Can I ask if the Government will establish a specific fund to help those most in need with the costs of insulation and heating upgrades? And can she tell me how the Government is going to make progress on retrofitting tenements in this Parliament?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, thank you for the warm wishes and welcome to your role in Parliament. The specifics around anything around retrofit and housing quality, obviously I'll be working with my Cabinet colleagues on. Shirley Ann Somerville have been leading on that. With regard to heating buildings, Stephen Gethens, who sat beside me now, will be taking forward the strategy on heating buildings as well. But the member has pointed to the fact that this is actually not just one Cabinet Secretary's role, it's not just a Cabinet's role, it's not just a government's role, it's a Parliament role, it's a local authority role, it is a private enterprise role as well in reducing emissions. It is a whole society change, but it's also a whole society opportunity. And highlighting on fuel poverty and warmer homes is one such area in which I think we can all agree that action to decrease bills and action to have homes that are drier and warmer will actually have an impact on families and will be better for generations of families going forward. And it's something that we're very serious about tackling in this government.
A number of members still wish to come in and we're going to need shorter questions. Pauline Stafford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate the Cabinet Secretary on her role. The Cabinet Secretary recently visited Blowhorn Moss National Nature Reserve in my constituency of Bathgate to mark World Peatland Day and celebrate Scotland exceeding its annual peatland restoration target. Having seen firsthand the innovative work and restoration work at Blowhorn Moss, can the Cabinet Secretary outline what contribution peatland restoration is expected to make towards reducing Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions and what further support the Scottish Government will provide to expand this work?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Pauline Stafford for that. Blowhorn Moss. I was there last week. Thoroughly enjoyed hearing from Peatland Action about the partnership work they've been doing with the government with innovative solutions around being deployed to wet that peatland, but also make it a haven for wildlife, as well as protecting the neighbouring communities from flooding. This year, the partnership between government and Peatland Action restored 15,448 hectares of degraded peat, and that is the equivalent of 30,000 football pitches for those that care about football. This exceeded our programme for government target by more than 3,000 hectares, and the climate change plan sets out how we will protect, manage and restore Scotland's peatlands for climate, nature and people, and details our ambitions to restore over 400,000 hectares by 2040. The importance of peatland cannot be underestimated. It is an emitter when it's degraded, and it is a sink when it is re-wetted. So we need to have that double whammy of opportunity in sequestering carbon for Scotland through our peatland restoration activities.
Donald McKinnon.
Presiding Officer, my register of interests will show that I run a crofting business in receipt of agricultural support. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's commitment to supporting farmers and crofters to reduce emissions, and I listened carefully to her response to Finlay Carson's question earlier. Does she share my concerns that the fall in emissions in agriculture published today is largely attributed to a drop in livestock numbers, with worrying implications for Scottish agriculture? And does she agree with me that the Scottish Government must deliver policy that maintains a critical mass of livestock across the country to support the supply chain and our rural economy?
Well, the simple answer to Donald McKinnon, who I welcome to his role as well, look forward to working with him. The simple answer is yes, and it's the reason why I discussed with the Climate Change Committee when they gave us advice on what we should be putting in our climate change plan, that they said that there should be policies that actively reduce livestock numbers, and we said no, Scotland's an agricultural nation, and we must maintain our herd numbers. Now, there are many reasons why, and he will know this, why herd numbers are coming down. We need to be making sure that our direct payments are associated with active farming, and that we give farmers and crofters the tools not only to decarbonise and reduce their emissions and their methane emissions in particular through innovation and through support payments, but also to ensure that they are working farms that produce food for our nation. And some of the policies we have across government, particularly on things like procurement for food locally for some of our public sectors, will hopefully improve that situation for farmers in Scotland.
Heather Anderson.
I will reduce my question, Presiding Officer. I want to welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her role, and declare an interest in someone who believes in the science of climate change. I welcome the Climate Change Committee's approval of our revised climate change plan and its focus on feasible and deliverable change. But I am slightly dismayed at the lack of progress and accept the Climate Change Committee's view that we must accelerate action. I would like to hear from the Cabinet Secretary some detail about the areas where she thinks acceleration in action can be focused and what she would hope to prioritise over the next 12 months.
Cabinet Secretary.
So obviously we need to ensure our pathway is ambitious and deliverable and central to the Government's approach, and I think that ambitious on its own is not good enough. It has to be fair and it has to be deliverable and achievable. We've worked closely with the Climate Change Committee. Their advice has informed in our emissions trajectory and the policies set out in the Climate Change Plan, with a couple of exceptions, and I'm meeting the Chair in the next couple of days. The plan, I think, is a roadmap for what Heather Henderson is asking me to look at, but if I pick on one particular area in which we're probably doing a great deal of work, is the decarbonisation of transport. And I'll be working very closely with my government colleagues. The Transport Cabinet Secretary is sat beside me. I'll be having a meeting with him on what's happening in the transport area. Again, that is going to be a huge opportunity for change and indeed making businesses more resilient to global shocks out with our control when it comes to fuel prices.
Graham Simpson.
Many thanks. Scotland has consistently missed its woodland planting targets, and actually the statement shows that, and the statistics show that we're still doing that. So I just wonder if the Cabinet Secretary, who I also welcome to her role, can tell us how she's going to improve the Government's record in this area. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think I maybe have to take slight issue with the fact that we're missing targets, and actually we're doing exceptionally well when it comes to woodland planting. But can I also say to Graham Simpson, it's of great comfort to me that Graham Simpson seems to remain, as he was in the last Parliament, and have an understanding of climate action being an imperative in this Parliament. I do wonder how he's going to get on with the climate change deniers in his group. I do wonder how he's going to square his... You cannot
point of order.
I'm answering a question. Can I continue?
Cabinet Secretary, there's been a point of order. Apologies, you perhaps didn't hear. Point of order.
Yep. Rule point 7.3.1, courteous and respectful manner. I think we've been extremely clear that we support the current IPCC, which...
Mr Massey, it's not an opportunity for a speech. I think you've made your point about courtesy, and that is a point that I would reiterate to the Chamber, that all members must be courteous to each other at all times. But I'm going to bring the Cabinet Secretary in to answer the question.
Yeah. If Graham Simpson wants to meet me to go through some of the actions that we're taking with regard to woodland and forestry creation, I'm happy to do that. But I do want to say that I was treating Graham Simpson with the utmost respect, because I have worked very, very closely with Mr Simpson in the previous Parliament on these issues. I was merely pointing out that it is a relief to me that there is someone in the Reform Party in this Parliament who still believes that climate change and climate action is something that needs to be addressed.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary referenced 105,000 jobs and also the contribution of £10.2 billion to the economy with regards to net zero related industries. So does the Cabinet Secretary agree that these figures are demonstrative of the renewable sector's important role in supporting economic growth and also employment, whilst working towards net zero by 2045?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I absolutely agree with Stuart McMillan. These figures are a powerful demonstration of climate action and economic growth going hand in hand with one another. Scotland's vast renewable energy potential is one of our greatest economic opportunities, and it's one that many other people in the rest of the world don't have the geography to be able to harness that we do. They don't have maybe the hinterland in terms of working in subsea capacities that we have in Scotland. It is an opportunity for us to continue to expand that sector, its wider supply chain, its magnificent supply chain, along with associated industries such as clean transport, heat, is expected to deliver thousands of well-paid sustainable jobs across the whole of Scotland, including in Stuart McMillan's constituency, as well as securing those lasting benefits for communities.
Ariane Burgess.
Can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her role that brings together climate action and rural affairs? The Cabinet Secretary mentions the important role our farmers and crofters must play in reducing emissions by increasing tree planting and peatland restoration. But today's figures show progress is being made, but this is only a starting point, and land managers need long-term certainty to plan their business activity. Can the Cabinet Secretary set out how large and small land managers across Scotland will be supported to scale up climate-friendly actions such as tree planting and peatland restoration?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you for the well wishes from Ariane Burgess, and I look forward to continuing to working with her on this most important of areas. And I know how passionate she is about this, as am I. We are going to be making sure that we continue with direct payments. We've actually been able to give payments early to growers, in particular where there is active farming happening. And of course, active farming also has to be sustainable farming as well, because the agricultural community in the sector, and indeed the land management sector by its very virtue of managing our land, has got not just the biggest responsibility, but also has got the biggest opportunity to assist us in how we get to net zero and how we improve the environment for everyone, but also create hundreds and hundreds of jobs, particularly in the areas of rural Scotland, particularly in the area that Ariane Burgess represents.
And the final questioner that I'll be able to call is Colm Merrick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and congratulations to the Cabinet Secretary on her new role. As the Cabinet Secretary knows, cars remain the largest contributor to emissions in Scotland, though thanks to SNP government investment, Scotland has led the way in the provision of public electric vehicle or EV charging points in the UK. Therefore, can the Cabinet Secretary say how the Scottish Government is continuing to encourage an uptake in the use of electric vehicles, and does the Cabinet Secretary share my concerns over the impact of the UK Government's new tax per mile on EVs, particularly on people living in rural areas?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Colin Merrick for that question, and it's a question that very much exercises me, the content of which, particularly the UK government putting motoring taxation and actually penalising EV drivers, when we should be encouraging the take-up of electric vehicles so that we can further decarbonise our transport. And this is particularly important in rural areas as well, where we maybe don't have the transport links that actually meet everyone's needs, and the ability for people in rural areas do need to use cars, and where they can, they should be having the opportunity to purchase an EV. The Scottish Government has invested over £70 million in public EV charging since 2011. The direct result of this funding, increasing private sector investment, has been crowded in as a result of that. We've now got one of the most comprehensive charging networks in the UK. The per mile tax, though, is damaging to not just Scotland's decarbonisation objectives, but the whole of the UK's. It can cost the average UK EV driver £350 a year, and some drivers in Scotland could pay over £50 more simply due to our geography. Also, I'm not sure how they're going to work it. So I've got lots of questions of this. I'd like to see it scrapped. I'd like to see EV take-up being incentivised.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and apologies to members that I was unable to call. The next item of business is a debate on motion 290 in the name of Stephen Flynn on growing Scotland's economy, and I'll give front benches the opportunity to change.